I've been a sister for 12 years now. I entered when I was 18. And yeah, my basic bio. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. I was asked to speak about the interior life and healing our desire for sin. I wanted to start with a story, just a quick story. I have the great privilege of teaching with a new mom. She just got married and she has a baby who's about 1 year old. And her name is Ainsley. And Ainsley was telling me about how she was with her daughter Charlotte, who's about 1 year old, and she was asking Charlotte, "Do you love me?" And Charlotte just kind of looked at her, like she didn't know what to say. And Ainsley was like, "Well, do you love me? Do you love me?" And Charlotte was kind of like just looked at her, you know. And Ainsley, like, at first felt this like deep pang of like, oh, my daughter doesn't love me. But then she had this realization that that's what happens in a way when we sin. When we sin, it's like God's looking at us. He's giving us an opportunity to show that we love him. He's asking us, "Do you love me?" And then we're looking at him. And it's as if we don't. And then that's when we commit the sin. So I thought that was a really powerful little story to show how God, like, in a sense, feels when we sin. Now this is interesting because technically God doesn't have emotions, even though in the Bible, in the way that the Bible is written, we do assign emotions. We have assigned emotions to God so that we can understand God better. But because God is unchangeable, so this is like a philosophical principle, since God is unchangeable, he doesn't really have experience emotions in the emotional life like we do. But the scriptures has revealed to us that God is love. And he loves us so much that he's willing to die for us. So his love for us is not this emotional love that can, grow and wane over time. No, it's a love that is a choice, right? St. Thomas Aquinas, I don't know how many of you are familiar with St. Thomas Aquinas. He was a Dominican from the 15th century who was a brilliant theologian, and he wrote something called the Summa Theologia, and it's still the premium text for all men who are studying to be priests. It's a huge part of our formation, and anyone who's really serious about the faith. If you read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, I don't know if you know much about the Catechism, but the Catechism of the Catholic Church is basically a book that tells you everything that the Church teaches. And if you look at the footnotes, after the Bible being referenced, the most common book referenced in the Catechism of the Catholic Church is St. Thomas's Summa Theologia. So St. Thomas is this premium theologian and mystic, and he wrote that love is not a feeling, it's a choice. It's to will the good of the other. And so Jesus was willing to die for us. And yet, there's something within our hearts, each of our hearts, that wants to do everything ourselves. There's a priest who gave a retreat when I was a young sister, and he said that the theme song of hell is, "I did it my way." I did it my way. When I teach my fourth graders, I call it the me monster. And it's all about me. This inward turning on my own desires and what I want for myself, and obeying this self other than God. There's a beautiful book that came out in the 50s and the 60s for kids making their first Holy Communion. So I work with young children, so I use this text sometimes when I'm preparing kids for their sacraments. It's called The King of the Golden City, and it's by a sister named Mother Mary Loyola, and it's an allegory. It's an allegory that follows a young girl in her relationship with the king, and the king is Jesus. And the little girl is supposed to represent each of us. So early on, the little girl meets, or this little girl, not really meets, but we're introduced to this person called Self, who is this girl's partner who's never separated from her. Now, Self is lazy, doesn't want to get up when the alarm goes off. She makes excuses, she's moody, she wants to take the easy way, she complains. And when the girl gives into listening to Self, her peace, who the king had given her, Jesus had given her, her peace is taken away. And the girl's guardian angel, when this happens, gives this advice. Self wants to have some pleasure or to get rid of some pain or trouble that very minute. It is not you she is thinking about at all. So this allegory is pointing to the fact that each of us have this self, this self that we carry on. In psychology, we call it the ego, right? So the reality is that the human condition is broken. We are inclined to selfishness and stroking our egos we're more inclined to do that than sacrificial love and living humbly in the truth. Disorder and dysfunction are rampant in our relationships, particularly in our families, because we all come from the dysfunctional family of Adam and Eve. Vice, addiction, and confusion about the most profound truths about our dignity, as created out of love by God, leads us easily to not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want, as St. Paul says in the letter to the Romans. There's nothing new here. I'm probably not telling you anything that's new. But it's important to remember our own brokenness and that this reality is present in others. So, what is the path to healing this human brokenness? And my goal tonight is to try and answer 3 questions. The first is, what does a healthy soul look like? St. Thomas Aquinas, in his writing, he's always pointing to the final end. So I think it's important, to start off, okay, what's the goal? What are we reaching for? What are the remedies for a sick soul? That's the second question. And the third question is, what are lifelong habits to cultivate and to maintain a healthy soul? And a lot of what I'm about to share with you for the rest of the talk is really what I myself have received as a religious sister in my formation. I don't pretend, I am not an expert in this at all. I don't pretend to be totally, a master of all this myself. But these are things that have really helped me in my spiritual journey, and I hope will be fruitful for you. Recently, I've started running or jogging on the treadmill for 15 minutes every day. You probably are a little bit more fit than I am, but I try. I started doing this summer, and at first, it was really painful. I am not naturally athletic, and it was just awful, but I knew it would be good for my bones, it would be good for my circulation, and for my mental health. What had happened was I was living with another sister who regularly exercised about 15 minutes a day, and she just had this lightness, and when I asked her about it, she said, well, she talked about how much running in a sense filled her bucket. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll try it, just to try something new and see if that'll help. And after doing it for a few weeks of absolute pain and sweat, there was one night I sat down after exercising and I was like, I feel really good. It was this rush of happiness. I don't know, I was like, I feel so good, And now I actually look forward to those 15 minutes every night because I teach during the day, so I can't run in the morning. I can't run when I get back from school because I need to be in a horizontal position when I get home in my bed for a nap before prayers. But so I usually run after our night prayers around 8 o'clock. And now if I don't run, my legs start to hurt. Mm. It's as if I've so much trained myself, that discipline of my mind over my body. So for those few weeks, it was just pure my mind over body. I'm going to make it to 15 minutes. I'm going to make it to 15 minutes. And now my body almost aches. It does ache for that. And I think this is a very good analogy that is not original to me at all. St. Paul uses it. The analogy of being an athlete is very poignant. We are called to be spiritual athletes. Spiritual athletes. You can think of the saints being the ones who are competing in the FIFA World Cup of the Spirit. We're called to be spiritual athletes. And so there are things that we can do to sharpen, in a sense, our spiritual agility. Okay, so the first question was, what does a healthy soul look like? So a healthy soul is one, St. Thomas says, that is full of grace. It has God's life within it. And of course we call Mary, she's full of grace. That is her one of her titles, She is the ultimate example, right? It is friendship with God, to have a relationship with Jesus. Now, a healthy soul, and this one little point could in itself be its own 30-minute, 40-minute talk, but the health of your soul is not dependent on the health of your body, but is intertwined with it. So what do I mean by that? That means the health of your body can absolutely affect the health of your soul. My kids have this phrase called hangry. That's how they get when right before lunch. They get hungry and angry at the same time. So they're hangry. Okay, so their bodies are affecting, how they're feeling at that moment. However, that doesn't mean if your body is sick that your soul is sick. Okay? In fact, rather, and this is the beauty of our Catholic faith, the cross of sickness of the body can be the vehicle of tremendous grace for the soul. If the person understands suffering to be meritorious. Meritorious meaning it can gain us merit for heaven. So I'm going to tell you a short story about a sweet girl. Her name was Rosie Robinson. She was from Nashville, the youngest of a big Catholic family. And when she was a senior in high school, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Now Rosie and all her siblings went through schools that our sisters taught at. So the family was very close with the sisters, and really Rosie was really the last one going through, and so were very, very formed by the sisters. And when she was diagnosed, she started a diary. Now, she passed away last year. Rosie passed away last year from the cancer. And her parents decided to read her journal that she started at the beginning of her journey of sickness. And when it was about a month after she died, they started reading. And they had known that Rosie was offering her sufferings up. They knew how much she was struggling. They knew she was struggling, but that she was trusting God and kind of accepting what was the cross that was given to her. She had several masses said at her bedside right before she died. She really had all the preparation. But it wasn't until they read her journal that they realized just how much she was offering up her sufferings. So I'm going to share with you a couple of quotes from her journal. She says, "I'm going to bring good out of all of this. Don't want it to go to waste." And she also says, "Bring it on, because I'm here to finish this race. Finish it hard. No jogging." On the website, her family has created a website, and they've given her the title Little Flower of Nashville. And on it, her family writes, she saw her cross as God loving her. She saw her cross as God loving her. The sisters who visited her the sisters walked with her the whole way, but really all the sisters that went and visited her during her last few weeks of life would comment on this radiant light that would just beam from her face, and this tremendous peace in her suffering. A few years ago, a priest in the homilies told a story. I'm not really sure where this story came from, but it's a good story, and it stuck with me, so I want to share it with you. It's about this man who was really, really struggling with the cross that God had given him. I don't know if it was sickness or in his relationships or what the cross was, but it was a cross that he didn't want to have. And one day, in a dream, Jesus came to him and said, okay, you don't want this cross. Would you like to pick your cross? Because you have to carry a cross if you want to follow me. And the man says, okay, I'll pick the cross. And so Jesus said, okay, come. And he brings him to a room, and it's full of crosses. And Jesus is kind of like walking him through, kind of like the store. Do you want this cross? Oh no, it's much too heavy. Okay. Do you want this cross? No, too rough. It's like, oh, like that's got splinters on it. No, I don't want that cross. How about this cross? You expect me to carry that cross? No, I can't do that. I'm not strong. And then the man goes, he looks at the door and he sees this cross, and it's leaning against the door, or by the door. It's like nice and light and smooth. He's like, I want that cross. And Jesus just smiles at him and says, that was the cross you came in with. So if we were to pick, we don't have that supernatural view that Jesus has, right? That God has planned for our lives. Jesus knows exactly the crosses that we need to make us holy so that we can follow him, so that we can make it to our final end, which is heaven. This takes a very special virtue. It's the virtue of acceptance, right? We have to accept the crosses that God gives us in order for his grace to suffuse our lives. A few months ago, the sisters that I live with in Kennesaw, there's 3 of us, we led a retreat for the moms in our school. And one of the sisters who gave the last talk, and she does not like to speak publicly, and so it was like really hard to get her to like get up there. But she made the most beautiful analogy in her talk. And after her talk, I mean, my talk was fine. The other sister's talk was good. After her talk, all the moms were weeping and weeping. Okay, so this was her analogy. I don't know if you know how olive oil is made. Okay, so made from olives, right? From an olive tree. Do you know how many olives it takes to make olive oil? So the sister that was giving the talk had lived in Rome for 4 years, and they have olive trees at our mission in Rome. And they would pick all the olives from their grove, which was like 4 or 5 trees, and it would be like 4 or 5 huge crates of olives. Then they would bring it to, I guess in Rome, in Italy, they have a place where like you can bring your olives and you can press. They'll press them for you, and then you get your olive oil at the end. So the sisters bring all the olives, and but when they get to the place, the person who's like helping press the olives says, okay, great, sisters, and they put it all in the olive press, and the amount of oil that comes out is about this much of olive oil out of all their barrels, And of course, because they're so kind to the sisters, they like mix it with other people's olive oil. The sisters go home with this huge thing of olive oil. But all those olives, pressed to make, just that little bit of olive oil. And I thought that was, and so the analogy sister is trying to show is like, the struggles that we have are kind of like each of those olives. And each of those struggles, in a sense, are opportunities for us to be, in a sense, crushed. Crushed so that we can become this beautiful olive oil. But it takes a lot of olives to make olive oil. So like all our sufferings, all our crosses, all our sacrifices, all the obstacles in our lives, all of our sins and vices and everything is all like individual olives that are being pressed to make that olive oil. Deeper than our desire for sin, which is what I started the talk off with, that our brokenness, we have this desire for freedom and happiness. To be healed from our desire for sin is to experience a foretaste of eternal happiness and freedom. Then, with our hearts purified from sin, we can, quote, host the heart of Christ within our hearts. And that was Father Keating. Our hearts are then conformed to Christ's sacred heart, an obedient, loving heart. And this happens in a contemplative spirit that is a life being daily converted through intimacy with God. How can we measure that our life has been, in a sense, healed? Well, through works of charity and justice, by doing God's work in the world. The one last virtue I want to point at in a healed soul is that of purity, which is a beautiful virtue to think about during the season of Advent, because Mary was so pure, right? And then we also want to purify our hearts during this time so we can prepare for Jesus to be born in our hearts at Christmas. So purity, like Mary's purity, opens us to God's grace in our hearts so that His will can be done in our lives. A pure heart is one free from sin and free for all the virtues to take root and blossom. Okay, so that's the goal, right? That beautiful soul, like that beautiful olive oil, a soul like Rosie's, accepting the cross with great love and wanting to just embrace everything that God was giving her, even though they're suffering. How do we get there? What are the remedies? This is the second question. What are the remedies for a sick soul? Well, number one is the sacraments, particularly confession and the Eucharist. Why? Because they bring an encounter with Christ that restores, so especially confession, and revivifies, so brings life, that's the Eucharist, into a person's soul, so that person can have a friendship with God. Confession, when I teach it to the younger kids, I just call it spiritual healing. It's healing for our souls. And the Eucharist is spiritual nourishment. It's food for our souls. So being brought back to and remembering our identity as beloved children of God and the love of God in the Eucharist allows us to enter more deeply into a healed life and away from sinful desires that tear us apart. So if you remember going back to that allegory that I mentioned about that girl and self, who's always with her, and how her peace was taken away when she let self boss her around, her guardian angel encourages her with these words. You may fail hundreds of times, but what of that? Your faults are no worse because you see them better. When the ugly measles marks show themselves, you say, oh, how frightful. But the doctor is quite pleased and says they are much better outside than inside. They will soon go away now. So to see what is ugly in yourself is a sign of better things to come. The King never discourages you. He is very gentle and patient with you. And He wants you to be patient with yourself. And that's really hard for especially women to do, to be patient with ourselves. Just that perfectionism that's in us. I don't know. It's really hard to conquer. It's really hard to offer up. But He wants us to be patient with ourselves. You cannot correct all your faults at once. Do not trust on your own strength, for you are very weak. But the Lord loves you and will send you help whenever you ask Him. It's great words of wisdom from the guardian angel. So in order to accept God's help, we have to have humility. It's a necessary virtue for healing because we have to accept the truth of our sinfulness before a remedy can be prescribed and take effect. So humility is not, oh, I'm so bad at this. Oh, I can never do that. I could never try and learn a language. I'm not smart enough for that. That's not humility. St. Thomas says humility is living in the truth. It's living in the truth of who you are. Okay, so the truth is I will never be a football player. NFL's football. NFL football player. What is NBA? Is this basketball? So I will never be a football player. Okay, in humility, I can acknowledge that. That's the truth of who I am. If I were to go around and be like, try and play football with the middle school boys, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just asking to get squished. So in humility, I can say, okay, this is the truth of who I am. Yeah, I am selfish. I am prideful. I get jealous. I don't like when other people get recognized for something that I did. It gets put on somebody else, like somebody else got the award, and I feel like I should have gotten it. I deserved it. I don't like that. I know that about myself. I know when I live in the truth of that, that's when it kind of all comes out. You have to acknowledge that and give that to Jesus and not trust on my own strength to heal that, but to ask him to heal it. There's a poem that you might be familiar with. It's called Footprints in the Sand. Have you heard of it? Footprints in the Sand. Okay, I'll just do a quick a summary of it for those of you not familiar with it. So it's a poem about a man who's dreaming about walking with the Lord along the beach, and as he's walking, he sees in the sky, all the trials in his life, and as he's walking, he sees two sets of footprints in the sand. He can't see the Lord, but there's two sets of footprints. So he knows the Lord's with him. And then, as they're walking along, he looks in the sky and sees the lowest and saddest time in his life, and then notices in the sand there's only one set of footprints. And he kind of complains to the Lord, like, I was at my lowest time, I was at my worst moment, and you weren't there. And Jesus consoles him and says how much he loves him and will never leave him, and that the one set of footprints was actually his own, Jesus's footprints, who carried the man in his greatest need. Now, this is a beautiful poem, and it's brought a lot of consolation to many people. But I want to contrast it with a not as famous poem that I was introduced to by a Dominican priest. His name is Father Emmerich. So let me read it to you. One night, I had a wondrous dream. One set of footprints there was seen, the footprints of my precious Lord, but mine were not along the shore. But then some strange prints appeared, and I asked the Lord, what have we here? Those prints are large and round and neat, but Lord, they are too big for feet. My child, he said in somber tones, for miles I carried you alone. I challenged you to walk in faith, but you refused and made me wait. You disobeyed, you would not grow. The walk of faith you would not know. So I got tired, I got fed up, and there I dropped you on your butt. Because in life, there comes a time when one must fight and one must climb, when one must rise and take a stand, or leave their butt prints in the sand. Okay. God absolutely never leaves or abandons us, no matter how dark and empty or lonely we feel. But when we are faced with a challenge to walk in faith, we have a choice to either grow or not to grow. And that growth is painful, like running on that treadmill, right? It's like climbing a mountain or running up a steep hill. We have to face our faults, the reality of our brokenness and sinfulness and weakness. We have to confront our egos and then ask God to break through with his grace. St. Thomas Aquinas gives us the spiritual principle, grace builds on nature. Another translation is grace perfects nature. So when God breaks through into our humanity, into our hearts, he doesn't destroy it. Rather, he elevates it. And he helps our minds and hearts fulfill its proper end, what we're all meant for, which is the vision of God. There is a really powerful prayer that many sisters and priests are afraid to pray. It's called the Litany of Humility. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. You can look it up. It's gorgeous. But you know, if you start praying the Litany of Humility, the Lord will answer those prayers. When I was in formation, my novice mistress asked us, okay, how can we grow in humility? And we're all sitting there like waiting for her to tell us the answer. And she said, by humiliation. That's how we grow in humility, which is painful to hear. But when you pray the Litany of Humility, it's a really powerful prayer. And it ends with this, that others may become holier than I, provided that I may become as holy as I should. Jesus, grant me the grace to desire it. Wow. So here in the Litany of Humility, and in the virtue of humility, we're called to no longer compare ourselves with others as the measure of our worth, but rather to be freed from those chains of comparison, to live in the peace and security of God's providence, of God's plan for my life, to be the saint that is just me. Father Emmerich, who is the one who introduced me to footprints in the sand, he also has a phrase, well, there's several. Discouragement is from the devil, and compare despair. When we're comparing with others, okay, it doesn't lead us to a good place, right? We have to enter into who God has created us to be, and to accept who God has created us to be, and to accept the crosses that God has given us, so that we can be the saint that God wants us to be. The question here was, what are the remedies for a sick soul? And we definitely can't go away from this question without saying just one thing about prayer. Prayer in itself could be an entire retreat, right? There's so much that you could say about prayer. But what is prayer? It's that daily, intimate conversation with God all day. That heightened awareness of the movements of the Spirit in your soul. To be able to discern, okay, I'm feeling off. I'm gonna bubble off. You know those rulers that have a little bubble that show you if it's like leveler, is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm.
A level?
Level.
Just a level. Okay, so you know the bubble's like a bubble. Okay, so I'm feeling like I'm a bubble off. Why? Right? You ask yourself why. What's going on in my spirit? What's going on? Like, Lord, is it sin? Is it I'm hangry? Like, why am I a bubble off? You know? And so to be able to discern all of that. Often I find a nap solves a lot of problems. Often it's just tiredness, right? But sometimes it can be deeper than that, for sure. So to be able to discern all of that takes a lot of prayer and silence. All right, I'm coming to the end here. My last question that I hope to answer for you is, what are lifelong habits to cultivate to gain and maintain a healthy soul? So we saw the goal, which was the first question. Like, what does a healthy soul look like? A soul full of grace. What are the remedies for a sick soul? Lots of different remedies. Humility, prayer, acceptance of our crosses. Okay, last. What can we do, some more practical things, to cultivate and maintain that healthy soul? Well, first of all, that regular reception of the sacrament. So going to confession regularly. I have the sisters, we go to confession about once every 2 weeks. Okay, once a month, I tell the kids, it's always a good idea. And the church says at least once a year, particularly before Easter. And then, of course, daily reception. Not daily reception of the Eucharist would be awesome, but at least the Sunday obligation of going to Mass Why? Because there's spiritual graces that God wants to give you. And we cannot live this life in a state of grace by ourselves. It's impossible. Okay? That guardian angel said to the girl, don't trust on your own strength. We have to ask God for his help and then surrender to him the outcome. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second, there's 5 in all. Number 2, deny the lower appetites for higher goods. And the word for this is fasting. And we think about fasting mainly during Lent, or we just think about like the monks in the monasteries, they fast all year round except for Easter. Okay, so actually fasting is a really, really good practice throughout the whole year. Okay? And St. Thomas Aquinas gives us 3 reasons to fast. Number 1, to conquer lust. He calls fasting a guardian of chastity. So when we practice temperance, when we are temperate in one area of our life, food, drink, TV, that helps temperance in all the areas of our lives. A second reason why we should fast, it puts our minds above things of this world to contemplate heavenly ones. So that just means we focus more of our energy on God rather than spending inordinate amounts of time watching the Food Channel. And then the last reason we should fast is to atone for our sins. Atonement for our sins. Taking on a little bit of discomfort and offering that up to God in sorrow for our sins that have so much offended him. So I'll just give you examples from my life. It might just be like not taking the ketchup when I eat French fries. Or not putting salt on my food once in a while. During Lent, I usually don't eat dessert. I'll still eat a brownie during my break, but I won't eat dessert at dinner. I don't know. It depends on what the thing is. It could be spending an extra 10 minutes after Mass. Instead of getting up when everybody gets up, just staying in the church and spending 10 minutes after Mass. Making an extra Thanksgiving. Lots of ways. It could be not listening to the radio or music in the car. Like fasting from your senses is a really great idea. And that's connected to my last advice for a habit to cultivate. So none of those things are bad. Brownies are not bad. But it's a matter of, it's almost like when I was starting to run on that treadmill, like that mind over body. Like I'm in control of my body. My body wants that brownie really badly, okay? But my mind says, okay, can I say no to that brownie? Which is it's a good, it's not, there's nothing inordinate about liking a brownie. Can I say no to that? And if I can, then I can say no more easily to something that is wrong, that is inordinate, that is unreasonable, right? So I don't know, saying no to this brownie is going to help me not get crazy mad at my kids for dropping pencils all over the floor, something like that. It's all in the same, we're one soul, we're united, so all those things help. Okay, so number 1, regular reception of the sacraments. Number 2, denying lower appetites for higher goods. Number 3, offering it up. So I don't know how many of you grew up with your parents telling you, offer it up, right? Mom, are we there yet? In the car. No, offer it up. Right? But we heard in the story about Rosie, and really the story of all the saints. You read Padre Pio, Don Bosco, all these saints went through incredible sufferings. But they all saw their sufferings as what? Meritorious. It's meritorious that we can offer up our sufferings to merit graces for ourselves and for others. There's another beautiful prayer that our sisters are addicted to. It's called the Surrender Novena. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a beautiful novena. It's by a man, a priest called, his name is Don Dolindo Rotolo. I don't know if I said that correctly. He's a servant of God. He was briefly Padre Pio's spiritual director, and he suffered tremendously from complete paralysis after offering himself as a victim soul for mankind. I don't know if you've ever heard of people doing this. You know, they offer themselves for mankind, for the salvation of souls. St. Catherine of Siena did that for the church right before she died. She offered up her life for the church. And then there's another prayer called the Litany of Trust. It's by the Sisters of Life. Both of these you could find online. They're beautiful prayers for surrendering to God's will. Okay, so the first one was the the Surrender Novena, and the second is the Litany of Trust. And those prayers just help us, give us the words to be able to offer up whatever is we're suffering at that time. Okay, so that's three things. The fourth is to study. A lot of you probably have been just graduated from college maybe, or from high school, and then have probably done higher studies in college or graduate school, and you're like, I'm done with tests. I'm done with studying. No more studying. Yes, I don't have to write another paper. But actually, study is really good for us to study, to have that like intellectual discipline of exercising our minds, our intellectual capacities, because first of all, it takes discipline and time, right? And so that's another example of like our mind over our bodies, because our body just wants to like turn on Netflix or like, go eat ramen noodles, or whatever. But I'm gonna dedicate 15 minutes every day to study. That takes a lot of discipline, And what you study matters. And you could study a language, you could study, how to win poker, you could study lots of different things. But the kind of study I'm talking about here is study that leads to contemplation. So just a couple of resources that you could use that are on the internet. It's awesome. Father Mike Schmitz has Bible in a Year, where you can read through the whole Bible in a year. He reads it to you and then gives you like an explanation of what it's all about. It's awesome. He's putting out on January 1st, Father Mike Schmitz, Catechism in a Year. I'm signing up, right? He's going to go through the entire catechism and read the Catechism of the Catholic Church and then give a little explanation of it. I think that's going to be awesome. And then a third place that you could go is, there's so many resources. Bishop Barron is awesome. The Augustine Institute is awesome. But the third one I want to recommend is, it's called the Thomistic Institute. Okay, it's run by Dominicans from the Eastern Province, from the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. And they just put out like podcasts and, lectures. Some are like 10 minutes, some are an hour. And they're Dominican priests who are answering great questions like, what is the soul? What are St. Thomas's 5 proofs for the existence of God? All these great theological and philosophical questions that people have being explained by, the best theologians in the world. I'm a Dominican, so I'm a little biased. I did not get paid for that promo. But it's awesome. We listen to it regularly at the Thomistic Institute. Okay, so number 1, sacraments. Number 2, denying lower appetites for higher goods. Number 3, offering it up. Number 4, continuing to study. And then the 5th one, and perhaps this one is might be the most difficult, is to limit your use of technology. And that could even be like the amount of times you access your email throughout the day. So remember, the question here is like, what are habits to cultivate to gain and maintain a healthy soul? Now, technology in itself is not bad, but it has morphed, it has changed. Well, there are some people in the 50s and 60s who kind of predicted that this was going to happen with the way technology was advancing. That is almost dehumanizing. I don't know if you've ever seen, Netflix came out with a documentary that's called The Social Dilemma. I highly recommend everybody watch it. It's basically a documentary that interviews like some of the founders and creators of Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, like all your big major social media outlets, and how they're all basically saying, yes, we have intentionally manipulated the public. In the way that we've designed our programs, we've created them to be intentionally addictive so that you will watch our ads, the ads that pay for our companies. And after you watch that, you kind of have this like grim feeling of like, oh no, what is our world coming to? And you're like, because it's called the social dilemma. There's not really a solution at the end. But just for yourself, that discipline of limiting, not abolishing. I mean, monks don't have cell phones. I don't have a cell phone. But limiting your technology use purposefully can actually really like free your mind, and you'll realize how much you've been under this like oppressive cloud of like people kind of controlling your thinking in a way. So a couple suggestions I have is buy books. You know, like I see people, this is fine, there's nothing wrong with this, but like people have their phones out at mass because they're following along the mass, which is really good to be following along, you know. They're probably more focused than like me, who's like thinking about my daily lesson plan that day, you know, or like calling that parent. So yeah, they're following along, but then like you'll have like a message pop up, right? Or, you know, oh, somebody's liked your Facebook post. And then suddenly it's like, all your attention is like, oh, everywhere. Okay, so buy a missal, a Sunday missal, right? Buy a daily Roman missal. Buy that book. Or even just like reading a book and not just reading it on like a Kindle. Not that those things are bad, but just saying like limiting it is a good idea. I learned this phrase over the summer, maybe you've heard it. Have you heard of dumb phones? Dumb phones? Yeah, so like dumb phones are like flip phones that don't have like a screen on it. You don't get the apps on it. You know, you can consider getting one of those where you're still like able to connect with people, but it's not going to cause you to become addicted to your screen. Matt Fradd, I don't know if you've heard of Matt Fradd. He's a huge speaker. He himself was addicted to pornography and was converted and healed, and now he's like, for several years now, he's been talking about the scourge of pornography and like going to high schoolers and college and grown-ups like talking about this. Anyways, he has this great podcast, or here I am talking about using technology. He has this great channel on YouTube, you know, and on it he talks about how he got rid of his smartphone, how much better he felt after that, and then he got this phone called a Wise phone. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a dumb phone, so you can't get apps on it, but it looks like a smartphone. So it's got a screen, and you can call, you can text certain people, you can, I don't think they have like maps on it yet. You can take pictures, but you can only see one picture, the most recent picture that you took. All the other pictures get uploaded to a cloud on your computer, so that you're not tempted to just like sit there and scroll through your pictures, you know. And he has this whole like podcast about how much this Wise phone has just been awesome for his life. You know, has really freed him from. He didn't even realize he was addicted to his phone until he got rid of it and then got this Wise phone. So, anyways, it probably costs about the same as a smartphone, you know. But it's just a great example of how people are responding to this social dilemma. Okay, so those are my 5 pieces of advice. So reception of the sacraments, denying the lower appetites for higher goods, offering it up, continuing to study, and limiting your technology use. Okay, I've come to my conclusion. Go to dinner. Okay, so I began with the story of a mother and a child. And I want to end with a story of a mother and a child. Of a young girl, purer than the most pure gold, bearing within her one hoped for by her people for centuries, the one who would bring freedom to captives, strength to the weak, and mercy to sinners, who would pour himself in complete self-giving sacrifice to reconcile the world, past, present, and future, to himself. His story did not just happen 2,000 years ago, but is recapitulated over and over again in every person's life. That's your life and my life. No sickness or disorder is beyond his healing touch. No unhealthy thought patterns or dysfunctional behaviors beyond his words that restore, renew, and revive. And he not only wants you to be spiritually well, but spiritually alive with his Spirit, the Holy Spirit. Yet, he is the ultimate gentleman and never forces himself and his grace, but rather invites you to respond when his grace breaks in. The olives of your life must be pressed hard to make olive oil. With courage, you must persevere, but also be patient with yourself. Through the lens of truth, you must see yourself humbly, and do not be lukewarm. Run so as to win. No jogging, all the way, till you see him face to face and melt into his embrace. I pray that you all have a blessed Advent, and thank you for having me. God bless you.